Our next story is from the state of Israel, but before I actually begin to tell you what's happening there, I want you to take a look at these images. You saw these visuals. They are from Jerusalem, and they show protesters who have blocked a road that leads to the Prime Minister's office. But why are they doing this? It is to stop the Prime Minister from even carrying out his official duties. And why would they do this? Because they're in fact deeply upset over the judicial changes that Netanyahu wants to bring about in the state of Israel. There is an overhaul of the Israeli judiciary that seeks to curtail the power of the Israeli courts. And the Israelis say that they do not want this. They call this authoritarian. So they've been protesting on the streets. They've been trying to force the government to in fact change its mind. The government is turning a deaf ear to their pleas. So what do the protesters do? They resort to some really desperate steps, and they block, believe it or not, they've blocked the Prime Minister's office. And if you think that's bad, then you must also look at this report. The same protesters also clogged the Ben Gurion airport. And they did this to disrupt Netanyahu's planned visit to Germany, which he has now, for the time being, delayed. Now, he was supposed to travel to Berlin for a 2-day trip. The protesters have been making it abundantly clear to Benjamin Netanyahu that if he wants to travel to the airport, then he would not be allowed to do this. And now Netanyahu has said that he has delayed his trip to Germany. Imagine a prime minister having to bow down to his people, but he can't even go to the airport at a time that he wants. Now, this entire episode is, of course, striking, especially if you look at the man that it is centered around. Netanyahu, or Bibi as he's called. He was the poster boy of Israel's right-wing hardliners, the biggest ambassador of the Israeli cause, the longest-serving Israeli prime minister, someone who's been elected to office time and time again for his hard right-wing policies. But right now, his own people have turned against him. The question is why? And the answer is Netanyahu himself. Remember, he came back to power in December 2022 with what many call the most right-wing coalition government in Israeli history. Netanyahu and his coalition allies thought that they could, of course, pull off a quick judicial coup that would make the judiciary subservient to the executive. They thought they could bring about these changes that they termed was a judicial reform. And these changes of the judiciary would have allowed them, with the narrowest of the election victories, to overhaul the entire judicial process. It would have effectively ended the independence of the judiciary in the state of Israel. Now, for the Anwars, the proposal made by the Israeli government seeks to curb the judiciary's influence over public policy. It also seeks to limit the Supreme Court's power to exercise judicial review and grant government control over judicial appointments by limiting the authority of legal advisors. In a nutshell, if this judicial change had been adopted, it would have granted the Israeli Knesset, the parliament there, to override the Israeli Supreme Court's decisions. Effectively, it would be the executive, that is the government, which would have been calling the shots, and the judiciary would not have had any much say in how the government was functioning. Netanyahu thought that the Israeli public would not object to his proposal, given how they've elected him to office time and again, despite the serious charges of corruption that he faces. However, he seems to have missed in reading the pulse of the people. Not only have the Israeli citizens come out onto the streets and have objected to his plan, they've taken to the streets to ensure that this proposal of his never sees the light of day. The images tell a story. Now, take these visuals, for instance. They are from Tel Aviv. Thousands of Israeli citizens are out on the streets, and they're chanting slogans against the Netanyahu government. They say that the Prime Minister is now becoming a dictator. They say that they want the state of Israel to remain a democracy. Let's listen in to some voices.
I'm here to demonstrate and to sound my voice against the dictatorship that they are established here in the name of the so-called law, judicial reform. It's not a judicial reform, it's a revolution that's making Israel go to full dictatorship. and I want Israel to stay a democracy for my kids, for my grandson that will be here, because Israel is a democracy country and it must stay as well.
To protest against the reform in the law and to protest against our prime minister that we call him crime minister. He is becoming a dictator, and we don't want dictatorship, we want democracy back.
It's not just the people in Israel. What is interesting that even the Israeli media is in fact questioning the government every step that it has been taking. Take this report, for instance. It was carried by the Jerusalem Post, one of Israel's oldest newspapers, and it is asking Netanyahu to look inwards and to listen to the voice of the Israeli people. So how is this to be perceived? Where exactly are things now headed in the state of Israel? Are we seeing a revolution in the making? If yes, then what is the Israeli government doing to stop this? Does it plan to scrap these proposed judicial changes? Right now, though, it appears that it is really difficult to predict as to which way Netanyahu would in fact swing. But the pressure on Netanyahu is, of course, increasing. Even members of his own party are now nudging him to try and strike a compromise on these judicial changes. But the question, of course, is, will Netanyahu, the man who has ruled Israel longer than any other prime minister, is he now willing to listen to his people? WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.